Hello guys, welcome back to LR Anime. Guys, please like the video and subscribe to my channel. Today is explanation of Soul Land 2 episode number 76 based on novel. So let's start. What? 4. Han Ruoruo and the others exclaimed at almost the same time. Wang Yang nodded and said, 4, indeed. They both have twin martial souls, and my surprise and awe back then was even stronger than yours is now. According to my knowledge, they might be the first pair of soul masters who both have twin martial souls and martial soul fusion skills, and that's probably how the miraculous 4 fusion skills came about. The skill that blocked Ruoruo's path forward was one of their 4 martial soul fusion skills, called the Golden Road amidst withering resplendence. Their 3 other martial soul fusion skills are equally powerful. Oh, Wu Ming, didn't you say that they transformed into Wang Donga, who was bathed in golden light, during the sea god's fate? That's also one of their fusion skills. Han Ruoruo heaved a faint sigh after listening to Wang Yang's explanation, and she said, I'm finally convinced. Wang Yang smiled and smoothly clasped her hands within his. You don't have to think badly of yourself. They have a very long road ahead of them to reach your level. Furthermore, it's easy to envy someone exceptional, and this may even affect them in the end. I just hope that all will be well during the next competition. Han Ruoruo reacted in shock. Will they even have a problem during the next competition with their current standards? I've interacted with Xiao Hongchen and Meng Hongchen before. Even though I don't know what level they can reach with their soul tools, and their soul master abilities are not bad, they are far inferior in terms of fighting strength. Wang Yang's eyes were overcome with a look of solemnity as he lowered his voice and said, this season is different from the previous one. Some things might be changed. The Academy is waiting for more accurate information. Wang Yang and the others departed, while Shrek 7 monsters began their post-mortem and discussed the salient points and shortcomings from the practice battle as they displayed their various soul skills to each other. They didn't spar against one another anymore, and everyone just respectively demonstrated their soul skills and improved fighting styles over the past 2 years so that everyone knew and could see them clearly. Afterwards, they spent another 2 hours rehearsing and working on their teamwork and cooperation. With Hua Yuhao's spiritual detection sharing, teamwork and command had never really been a problem. They worked all the way to lunchtime before they stopped, and it was clear that everyone was now much more familiar with one another than before. Bei Bei immediately made the decision that everyone would proceed to the sparring arena to practice in the morning from today onwards, and practice their own respective cultivations in the afternoon and at night. That night, Hua Yuhao and Wang Donga received news about their registration to participate in the hunting party heading towards the Great Stardo Forest. The Sea Gods Pavilion allowed their participation in the end, but 2 more people were added to lead the group in addition to Zhong Lashuan. One was Han Ruoruo, who had just crossed paths with Hua Yuhao, and the other was the Martial Soul Department's Vice Dean, Xie Maya. Xie Maya naturally became the operation's main commander. Hua Yuhao and Wang Donga immediately received the name list for this operation after they asked for it. Xie Maya, Zhong Lashuan, and Han Ruoruo were heading the operation. They didn't require soul rings, and their main responsibility was to protect the other inner courtyard students. One was a titled Doluo, and the 2 others were Soul Duluos. They were leading a team of advanced students on a hunting expedition. Perhaps only Shrek Academy could make this such a smooth operation. There were 2 guys on the name list that required new soul rings that Hua Yuhao didn't recognize, and Wang Chua was also on the list. There were 4 members from the inner courtyard who needed soul rings, and in addition to Wang Donga who was just tagging along, the entire group was comprised of 8 people. Their departure time was the morning the day after the next. On the second day, Shrek 7 monsters continued to rehearse and practice their formation and their teamwork. Hua Yuhao and Wang Donga left the Sea Gods Pavilion in the morning on the 3rd day, and they were early as they waited outside the Academy's main gate. It didn't take long before the students from the inner courtyard who were participating in this expedition gathered. Wang Chua was still dressed like she had always been. A long veil covered her extraordinary beauty, and her blue wave-like hair was tied into a ponytail behind her head. She wore a pale green warrior's robe that formed an amusing color combination with her hair. There was a bit too much contrast between the colors. Wang Donga was clad in a white warrior robe, while her long hair was combed into a relatively more complicated scorpion braid while she wore a similar veil over her face. The 2 girls' gazes met when they first saw each other, and it immediately felt as if sparks were going to erupt from the collision. They exchanged one look before they turned back around. Hua Yuhao felt a little strange inside. They clearly looked exactly like each other, and they should thus logically be a lot closer and more intimate with each other. He didn't know why, but Wang Donga seemed to marginalize Wang Chua. While this could be explained by the fact that Wang Chua looked more like the goddess of light, it was also apparent that Wang Chua wasn't being friendly towards Wang Dong either, as her eyes were exceptionally cold. Sermia was the last to arrive, wearing a simple grey shirt. She had passed 9 decades of life long ago, but she looked like she was only a little more than 50 on the outside. Managing to maintain her appearance. Hua Yuhao had the least interaction with this vice dean. All he knew was that she seemed to have some problems with Dean Xian, but he wasn't sure about the details. Siamaya clapped her hands when everyone gathered, and everyone turned to look at her. Siamaya smiled and said, "Everyone here is from the inner courtyard, and it's not the first time we've entered the Great Stardo Forest. We have new participants in our expedition, so we should introduce ourselves to each other. Take turns to brief everyone about your name, your martial soul, your cultivation level, and whatnot so that we can cooperate better in the Great Stardo Forest." She nodded in Zhong Lushuan's direction as she finished speaking. Zhong Lushuan responded immediately, going first. "My name is Zhong Lushuan, and I'm an assistant teacher from the inner courtyard and a student at the same time. My martial soul is the moon, and I'm an assault-type soul master. I'm responsible for leading the team, and I don't require any soul rings. My soul power is at rank 86. Everyone began to stir when they heard her say rank 86. This included Hua Yuhao, and Wang Dong. Han Ruoruo continued immediately after her and said, "Han Ruoruo, assistant teacher and student of the inner courtyard. My martial soul is the dazzling golden rope, and I'm a control-type soul master. I'm the main control soul master for this operation, and I don't require any soul rings. My soul power is rank 82. After they completed their introductions, Cai Maya interrupted them and said, "I'm just tagging along in this operation. Lushuan and Ruoruo will be doing the commanding and whatnot. They have ample experience, so everyone has to listen to them, and nobody is allowed to do anything on their own. This is all for your personal safety, and it's also for the team's safety. Our expedition's destination will be the border of the Greater Stardo Forest's hybrid region crossing over into the core region. We can run into very powerful soul beasts at any time in that area." "All right, continue. Your turn, Yuhao." Hua Yuhao hurriedly nodded when he heard Cai Maya point him out. "My name is Hua Yuhao, and I'm a student from the inner courtyard. I'm both control type and assault type, and I have twin martial souls, Spirit Eyes and the Ice Jade Empress Scorpion. My soul power is rank 52, and I need a 5th soul ring for my spiritual type martial soul, the Spirit Eyes." Wang Donga continued beside him. "Wang Donga, student from the inner courtyard. I'm an assault-type soul master, and my martial soul is the radiant butterfly goddess. I'm a rank 61 soul emperor, and I don't need a soul ring. I can unleash martial soul fusion skills with Hua Yuhao, and I'm here to accompany him on this expedition." Their introductions were extremely brief, but they didn't feel ordinary at all to the other students. The other 3 students in this operation who had participated in the Sea God's fate had personally witnessed Hua Yuhao and Wang Dong's incredible prowess. They were 2 against 5, and everyone was around the same level, and all 7 were students from the inner courtyard. Yet, Hua Yuhao and Wang Donga had won a dominating victory. However, they were a little confused about Hua Yuhao's introduction. He needed a 5th soul ring at rank 52? What circumstance was that? Could it be that he was adding soul rings to both of his martial souls at the same time? Twin martial souls shouldn't be cultivated like that. This was Shrek Academy, and there were so many veteran teachers around here. How could they let him make this mistake? Another male student said, "My name is Li Yongyu, a student from the inner courtyard. I'm an agility-type soul king at rank 60, and I need my 6th soul ring. My martial soul is the Moonblade. Do you remember me, eldest senior sister? When you unleash your martial soul, I will be naturally amplified." He was probably around 26 to 27 years of age, but the admiration he displayed towards Zhong Lushuan represented her status in the inner courtyard as everyone's eldest senior sister. Zhong Lushuan nodded in his direction with a faint smile on her face, but she didn't say anything and gestured to the other male student to introduce himself. "My name is Mo Xian, and I'm a long-range all-around auxiliary-type soul king at rank 60, and I need a 6th soul ring. My martial soul is the Halo. My close combat abilities are weak, so you have to help me out, everyone. Thanks." Li Yongyue's looks were average, and he was the kind that was hard to spot in a throng of people. Mo Xian seemed a little more shy. He was probably at least 25 years old, but his face would blush a little as he spoke. A long-range all-around auxiliary-type soul master? This was the first time Hua Yuhao had heard of such a description, and he couldn't help but throw a few more glances in his direction. CAI Maya helped alleviate everyone's doubts. You guys probably haven't seen Mo Xian before. He's a unique talent that's being specially nurtured by the inner courtyard. His fighting strength is weak, so Lushuan, you have to pay special attention to protect him. Mo Xian's auxiliary abilities cannot be considered outstanding during single and group battles, but he's the first and only long-range all-around auxiliary-type soulmaster in the Academy's most recent 1,000 years of history. His auxiliary prowess on the battlefield isn't something that normal auxiliary-type soulmasters can compare to. You guys will experience it once we're inside the forest. Everyone except Wang Chua had completed their introductions, so their eyes all turned towards her. Wang Chua's voice was a little cold as she said indifferently, "My name is Wang Chua. Assault type. My martial soul is the Golden Dragon. I'm rank 60, and I need a 6th soul ring." Her speech was the simplest amongst everyone's introductions, and her eyes were staring into the sky as she spoke. She gave everyone a feeling of arrogance and aloofness. Wang Donga pouted with displeasure as she saw that look. Fortunately, she was wearing a veil over her face, so nobody could see her reaction. Zhong Lushuan said, "All right, everyone has finished their introductions, so let me allocate our formation once we enter the Great Stardo Forest. I will be scouting the path ahead, and Li Yongyu and Wang Chua are responsible for the left and right flanks respectively. Ruoruo will be positioned in the center towards the front right behind me, and she'll be the main control-type soul master. Mo Xian will be positioned behind Han Ruoruo, which means you'll be near the center. Do pay attention to cooperate with everyone's movements. Huo Yuhao, you're the secondary control for flexibility, and you will be behind Mo Xian. You're responsible for providing support for whoever needs help. Wang Donga, you'll be all the way at the back, and you're responsible for sweeping. Dean Cai will be following behind the group, and she won't make a move other than as a last resort. We're all students from the inner courtyard, and it will extremely humiliating if we need a teacher's help to obtain our own soul rings, so I hope that doesn't happen. Alright, let's proceed if nobody has any more questions or objections. Nobody had anything to dispute about her arrangement. There was no doubt that the central and anchoring positions were relatively safer. There was no need to mention the center, and Cai Maya was all the way at the back. There was a deeper meaning to arranging Wang Chua and Li Yongyu on the two flanks. Wang Chua's martial soul was the Golden Dragon, and she stirred up quite some disturbance when she successfully enrolled in the inner courtyard. She was said to have impressive fighting strength, as the Golden Dragon was the ancestor of strength, and thus assigning her to one flank was also a test. Li Yongyue's strength would also be greatly boosted with Zhong Lushuan around, so assigning him to guard the other flank was the optimal choice. Huo Yuhao and Wang Donga's positions, along with Mo Xian's, were considered protected. The academy still had some bias after all. The truth was, Cai Maya wouldn't have been with them in this operation if Huo Yuhao hadn't registered for it. Everyone belonged to the inner courtyard. Even if they weren't that familiar with each other, they would definitely not hold each other back. They got in line with Zhong Lushuan's formation once they left Shrek City, and went straight for the Great Stardo Forest. Nobody deliberately attempted to display his or her speed on the way, and the formation was maintained impeccably under Zhong Lushuan's deliberate control. Just as Cai Maya had said, this wasn't the first time these students were going inside the Great Stardo Forest. Everyone was extremely familiar with this place, and nobody really interacted with each other along the way. Everyone just hurried onward. Wang Donga glanced at Wang Chua beside her from time to time, and even Huo Yuhao couldn't help but throw a few glimpses in her direction. Wang Chua looked very quiet, but one could see from the side that her eyes were exceedingly cold and plain, as if she were wearing an outer layer over herself at all times. She could definitely feel Wang Donga's stares, but she never once looked back to return her gaze. She didn't release her martial soul when they traveled, she just simply ran along. However, she bounced up with bewildering speed every time she touched the ground with her feet, and one could tell upon closer inspection that there would be a groove in the ground after every step she took, while the ground around her footprint seemed to have cracked. She was dashing forward with pure strength, yet she looked like she was floating. She lived up to her name as the ancestor of strength and the owner of the Golden Dragon martial soul. Shrek City was quite close to the Great Stardo Forest. They didn't unleash their full speed, but still reached the forest before midday. Let's take a break and grab something to eat, everyone. Adjust yourselves to your optimum condition and states. We will proceed into the forest after 1 hour. Zhong Lushuan's instructions were short and concise. They were near the Great Stardo Forest's peripheral region. They would be inside the forest once they passed the danger signs that dotted the road. Huo Yuhao felt a sense of nostalgia as he stared at a danger sign hanging from a tree not far from him. He could clearly remember what it was like during his first trip here, as that expedition had changed his destiny. He met the Skydream Iceworm, Electrolux, his senior brother Bei and Xiao Ya. Following the passage of time, Electrolux was gone, and there was no news about teacher Xiao Ya, while he had grown up as well. Everyone came by the roadside. Their cultivations meant they were far from fatigued, but slowing down and relaxing still felt good anyway. Zhong Lushuan said to Hu Yuhao with a smile on her face, "I hear from Bei that your culinary skills are exceptional, Yuhao. I remember you selling grilled fish outside the academy a long time ago. What do you think about showing us your skills?" A thought came to Hu Yuhao's mind as he said, "There's a small river nearby, eldest senior sister." This place was close to the small stream where he had first met Bei and Tang Ya. Zhong Lushuan smiled and said, "I know. I'm not sure how many days we'll be spending in there once we head in, and the living conditions are going to be harsh inside. We won't get good food, and we'll have to sleep in the open. Everyone should enjoy a good meal before we enter. How about this? Li Yongyu will follow me to catch some fish, and Yu Hao will be responsible for preparing and cooking them. Are you two okay with that?" She was a lot more familiar with the landscape of the Great Star Do Forest's peripheral region than Hu Yuhao was. Yes. The two of them acknowledged at once. Zhong Lushuan stood up and said, "The others will help Yu Hao prepare the firewood needed for the grilled fish. We will get to enjoy our food earlier if we work together." Cai Maya didn't hide herself as she followed behind the students. She came forward at this moment, and a faint smile appeared on her face as she watched the students bustle around. She thought to herself, "These youngsters are so full of life and energy. It's nice to be out here to walk around." They were all high-level soul masters, so how easy was it for them to collect firewood and catch fish? It didn't take long before Zhong Lushuan and Li Yongyu returned with more than 10 huge fish skewered on vines. It was clear that these two didn't really know how to cook, and Hu Yuhao immediately returned to the riverside with the fish that they had brought back. The first step to grilling fish was to process the fish properly, and then to grill it directly. Would that actually work? Zhong Lushuan followed Hu Yuhao back to the riverside with a tinge of curiosity as she watched him take the fishes from the vines. He washed them again inside the crystal-clear river as he cut them open, took out their organs, peeled off the scales, and extracted the tendons. Extracting fish tendons was a special technique, as most people who steamed fish didn't do that, so the fish they made would have a strong fishy smell. It wasn't hard to remove the tendons. One would use a sharp blade to cut the fish below the gills before cutting the fish near the tail, and then one would carefully look for a small white dot on the wound's cross-section before using the back of the blade to tap lightly on the fish's body. If appropriate strength was applied, it wouldn't take too many hits before a small white tip that looked like the tip of a needle would emerge, and then one would pinch it and pluck it out, and the tendons on that side would be extracted. Every fish had 2 long tendons, and one would have to follow all these steps to consider even simple preparations complete. Both Zhong Lushuan and Wang Donga were watching by the side. They wanted to help, but they were clumsy and confused when they actually tried. Their formidable cultivations were useless at times like these, and they could only sit by and watch. Hu Yuhao picked the things he needed from his surroundings. He found some spices and herbs that he was relatively familiar with and picked a pile before he returned to camp. He placed the washed fishes and the herbs onto some large clean leaves, and Chef Hu finally got to work. Perhaps it was because his life had been tough and difficult as a kid, but he always carried his cooking tools with him. Bowls, ladles, tubs, all sorts of seasonings, he had everything. When he took out all these things from his starlight sapphire storage ring, the other students stared unblinkingly. Han Ruoruo couldn't help but laugh as she said, "Are you preparing to be a chef in the future, Yu Hao? This is the first time I've seen someone place cooking tools inside a top-tier storage item such as the Starlight Sapphire." Hu Yuhao chortled and said, "I used to be very poor, and it wasn't easy for me to fill my stomach. It's become a habit for me to bring these things when I come out, and even non-soul masters won't go hungry." These simple sentences embodied his childhood experiences. Everybody else was relatively well off, so everyone grew silent for a moment after listening to his words. Even Wang Chua glanced at him a few times. Hu Yuhao was explaining with his mouth, but his hands didn't stop. He laid out 2 piles with the firewood that everyone had brought back before he lit one pile and planted 4 thick branches in the ground and hung a large wok over the top. The wok contained clear water that had previously been collected from the small stream. He finished setting up the wok on one side, and the grill that he always used, which was supported on both sides, was set up on the other side. He was even more familiar with this thing. He applied and stuffed all kinds of seasoning and spices into the fish's stomachs. He opened a hole on both sides of the fish's bodies before he skewered them with a clean wooden stick and began to grill them. He began to slather oil on both sides of the fish. This would give the fish a denser taste, and they wouldn't burn so easily. The fragrant smell of grilled fish wafted over in no time. Everyone retrieved their rations and were sitting around, but they stared at the dry rations in their hands while they smelled the aroma, and suddenly everyone didn't feel like eating their rations anymore. Only Wang Chua was sitting to one side as she nibbled quietly on her rations. She didn't even look at Hu Yuhao. Zhong Lashuan was also sitting nearby as she watched Hu Yuhao. Her eyes rotated to the other students, and a subtle smile appeared on her face. She was the team leader, and her task was not only to command and protect her teammates, more importantly, she had to break the ice between this impromptu group and to glue them together, so that everyone would feel closer to each other, and they would feel more like a team. This was the only way she could enhance their chemistry in the fights that were to come, and this was the only way to make them feel more intimate. Her choice to ask Hu Yuhao to grill fish was partially because of this, as a nice meal would easily pull everyone closer together. He was closely monitoring the grilling process with his spiritual power, and the first grilled fish was finished in no time. There was no question that seniors had priority, so Hu Yuhao took this first grilled fish to Semaya. Thank you. Semaya took the fish with a smile on her face as she took a huge bite. The yellowish golden fish skin was crispy and slightly salty, and there was also a tinge of spiciness. The fish was tender and juicy, and just one bite left a delicious taste behind. Dean Cai's face was overcome with astonishment, and she wasn't stingy with her praise. Yuhao, you have the standards to become a professional chef. It's no wonder I remember your business flourishing when you used to sell grilled fish outside the academy's main gate. This is the best grilled fish I've ever eaten. Hu Yuhao chuckled, but he didn't continue grilling his fish, and instead walked over to the wok over the other fire. He put some wild vegetables in before he added another can of seasoning. The water was boiling by this time, and his seasonings were only just added when another fragrance permeated the air, and the soup turned a light red color. He returned to the grill to continue his grilling. Zhong Lashuan and Li Yongyu had returned with enormous fish. Every single one weighed more than a kilogram, while the biggest ones were around 2 to 2.5 kilograms. There were only a little more than 10 fishes, but they were enough to feed everyone here. The fish were grilled one after another, and Hu Yuhao's allocation was simple. He went according to age, and the eldest came first. Zhong Lashuan was naturally the second one in line after Cai Maya. Even though Zhong Lashuan jokingly remarked on the fact that she was the second oldest, she was still immensely attracted by the grilled fish's aroma. Han Ruoruo, Li Yongyu, and Mo Xian were next. Wang Donga was almost drooling as she stood beside Hu Yuhao. She watched as the seventh fish was almost ready, and a threatening look flowed from her eyes as she stared at him. Her rosy lips curled upward, as if she were saying, "This one must be mine." Hu Yuhao whispered, "Others before self. You have to wait for a while longer, and I will pick a large one for you." Wang Donga grimaced when she heard him say others before self, but she didn't stop Hu Yuhao as he walked towards Wang Chua. Wang Chua was seated furthest away from the bonfire, and she didn't interact with the others either. She was just quietly munching on her dried rations, and she only lifted her head subconsciously when Hu Yuhao arrived in front of her. "This is for you." Hu Yuhao handed her the fish in his hands. The grilled fish skin was glowing as an alluring aroma wafted through the air. "For me? Aren't you afraid of your little girlfriend becoming upset?" Wang Chua didn't take the fish, but questioned him as she stared into his eyes. Their gazes met, and for some reason, Hu Yuhao felt a delicate dizziness in his mind when he stared into those powdery blue eyes, even though these abstruse eyes were absolutely different from Wang Dong's eyes. The moment was fleeting, but it was enough to surprise him. Wang Chua took the grilled fish that he handed over as she lowered her head and said, "Thank you, have we met before?" Hu Yuhao asked curiously. Wang Chua answered matter-of-factly, "I think this is our third meeting. If you don't want your little girlfriend to think you're flirting with me, you should go back." She took a bite of the grilled fish in her hands as she spoke. She was momentarily stunned when the delicious flavor entered her mouth, and a peculiar light flickered across her eyes. Wang Donga was still hungry, so Hu Yuhao didn't dally. However, he was starting to believe Wang Donga's judgment that Wang Chua wasn't simple at all, and she definitely had to have some secret. He involuntarily developed an increased sense of wariness as these thoughts ran through his head. He returned to the campfire and picked a bigger fish for Wang Donga. She was already waiting eagerly, and soon the grilled fish was finally done. "Here you go. Careful, it's hot." Hu Yuhao passed the grilled fish to Wang Donga. A soothing smile unwittingly appeared on his face as he watched her excitement. Wang Donga couldn't be bothered with her image anymore as she sat right there and began to eat. She was almost burned, but she just kept going on about how tasty the grilled fish was. Hua Yuhao chuckled softly. This fish must be the most delicious one. Wang Donga continued nibbling away at her fish as she asked a little fuzzily, why? Hua Yuhao laughed and said, there's an added spice in this one, a kind that the other fishes don't have. Wang Donga was surprised, and said, you actually hid something from the others? Aren't you afraid of them calling you stingy? Hua Yuhao shook his head. No, I'm not. This spice can only be used when grilling for you, because it's called fondness. Wang Donga was slightly taken aback, but she quickly recovered as her cheeks immediately turned rosy. She whispered, is it just fondness? Hua Yuhao fiddled with the next grilled fish in his hands as he smiled and said, love comprises a lot of fondness. The spices next time will taste even richer. Wang Donga didn't pursue the matter further as she chomped on the grilled fish in her hands, before she flashed a sweet smile at Hua Yuhao. She had already removed her veil at this point, and her enchanting beauty dazed Hua Yuhao to the point where he forgot to flip the grilled fish he was working on, and the fish he made for himself was a little burnt. It's burnt. The taste will be a lot denser, even if that wasn't what I wanted. The grilled fish was rich and fragrant, while the wild vegetable soup was sweet and refreshing. This meal couldn't be considered nutritious or luxuriant, but it had appeal of the mountains and the wilderness, and with that, in addition to the delicious flavor, everyone was happy with it. Some people even fought a little over the last few pieces, and their method naturally came down to rock paper scissors. Everyone became a lot closer than before from all this interaction, and only Wang Chua remained quiet and isolated. In the end, 1 hour of rest became 2 hours before they finished up. After the delectable meal, everyone began to meditate while Dean Cai protected them so that they could be at their peak conditions. Hua Yuhao would feel a sense of detachment, as if he were separated from the world, every time he entered the lush Great Stardow Forest. The truth was that the Great Stardow Forest was like an independent nation, the country of soul beasts. Everyone was a high-level soul master, and everyone pushed forward at full speed after entering the peripheral region under Zhong Lushuan's leadership as they ventured toward the deeper regions. This time was vastly different from the times Hua Yuhao had entered the forest. Zhong Lushuan was leading the group, and she had no intention of scouting carefully, they just proceeded forward at full speed. Her body glowed with brilliant white light, and the trees and logs on the ground opened up wherever she walked, while her body emanated a powerful aura. The lower-tier soul beasts didn't dare to come near, and their speed was at least 3 times faster than when Hua Yuhao and the others were last here. This was the meaning of strength. They relied on pure power to force their way forward, while they would rest for 15 minutes after traveling for 2 hours. They could tell they were out of the peripheral region by judging the strength of the soul beasts around them when the sky gradually turned dark. They were slowly crossing into the hybrid region. Maintain the formation, everyone. Pay attention, main control and secondary control. Zhong Lushuan slowed down conspicuously. The soul beasts around them would be mostly 1,000-year soul beasts once they entered the hybrid region, and there would probably also be 10,000-year soul beasts, which were presences that were enough to threaten everyone. 10,000-year soul beasts were also precisely what everyone had come here for. Hua Yuhao's eyes lit up as he gripped Wang Dong's hand subconsciously. The Haodong power circulated between them as golden light flowed from his eyes. His spiritual detection was passed to everyone on the team, and it extended outward with astounding speed, covering a radius of 600 meters around them in the blink of an eye. All the plants and trees, the landscape, and various other parameters quickly surfaced in everyone's minds. Hua Yuhao had no problem assisting 7 people at the same time via spiritual detection with his current spiritual power, and his detection distance far exceeded his past limits. However, other than Wang Dong, everyone was clearly not used to his spiritual detection. They couldn't help but pause in their tracks when Hua Yuhao activated his soul skill, to the point where Hua Yuhao almost slammed into Mo Xian, who was walking in front of him. Everyone tossed their heads backward, and Hua Yuhao immediately became the center of attention. This was especially so for Zhong Lushuan, who was right at the front. Her eyes were filled with astonishment. It was needless to say what the effect of such immense scouting power would be like for the team. Zhong Lushuan was team leader, and also an assault-type soul master, and she instantly felt as if the burden on her shoulders was greatly lifted. How's the consumption, Yuhao? Zhong Lushuan asked immediately. Hua Yuhao answered without hesitation, I can recover as we travel. I can maintain this for a very long time as long as I don't expand the area of effect. Zhong Lushuan asked in surprise, you can expand the area of effect? What's the limit? Hua Yuhao immediately gave her the numerical details. I can reach an area of around 1,500 meters in diameter, while my vertical detection limit can reach around 3,000 meters. I can increase the precision and clarity by 100%. However, I will consume a lot more soul power if I do that, so I can't keep it up for a long period of time. Everyone could be heard drawing cold breaths. This soul skill didn't come with any offensive or defensive capabilities, but it was exceptionally useful for detection and exploration. Having this skill was equivalent to being able to predict dangers, and thus could be considered a super soul skill in the Great Stardew Forest that was filled with perils. Zhong Lashuan said decisively, maintaining this area of effect is enough. From now onwards, Hua Yuhao will be the main control and Ruoruo will be switched to secondary control. Any objections? Han Ruoruo had known her and coordinated with her for many years, and she answered without hesitation. No problem. Hua Yuhao paused momentarily, but answered, I'm okay with that. Nobody had any disputes about him taking over that role because all but fools could sense his spiritual detection's usefulness with spiritual detection activated. Zhong Lashuan picked up the pace once more, and they went straight for the inner circle. However, once they entered the hybrid region, not all the soul beasts in the area would be terrified by her aura. They didn't travel for long before everyone received an alarm signal in their minds. Zhong Lashuan immediately halted, and she followed the spiritual detection's guidance and gazed toward a certain direction. There was a soul beast crouching on a thick branch about 200 meters away from them. This video will end here. Thank you for watching.